Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. Today, I'd like to respond to the question, what is it that makes the NVC practice so difficult? And my way of responding to that question, it has to do primarily with the fact that it is very hard for people in our corner of the world or in modern society to not think in terms of what works for them personally. We all very much want to have what we want when we want it. And when we're not getting what we want, there's a tendency to become enormously frustrated. Now, this is not true for everyone, but it is true for many people. And when people think about nonviolent communication and improving their communication skills, they're usually approaching it in the following way. They're thinking about how it will improve their life. They don't typically think about how it will improve the lives of others around them. Isn't that true? We're thinking about how can I increase my chances of getting what I really long for, getting what I want. And I'm just wanting to point this out. In and of itself, you could say that's a natural tendency, and it's not so much problematic unless we insist on getting our way. So I want to simply recognize that what drives people to learn nonviolent communication is their own suffering. I'm suffering in this relationship, and communication appears to be a major problem because whenever we start talking about what's important to either one of us, we end up having a huge argument. So this must mean that we don't know how to communicate. In fact, I would say probably the communication is a clear and honest reflection of what's going on in the relationship. It does point to the fact that so often we're wrestling about who's right and who's going to get what they want. So I'd like to return for our purposes to page 1 of Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life by Marshall Rosenberg, because there's so much answered in this question about why is it so difficult. So it's right here, believing that it is our nature to enjoy giving and receiving in a compassionate manner. I have been preoccupied most of my life with two questions. What happens to disconnect us from our compassionate nature, leading us to behave violently and exploitatively? And conversely, what allows some people to stay connected to their compassionate nature under even the most trying circumstances? My preoccupation with these questions began in childhood around this summer of 1943 when our family moved to Detroit, Michigan. The second week after we arrived, a race war erupted over an incident at a public park. More than 40 people were killed in the next few days. Our neighborhood was situated in the center of the violence, and we spent 3 days locked in the house. When the race riot ended and school began, I discovered that a name could be as dangerous as any skin color. When the teacher called my name during attendance, 2 boys glared at me and hissed, "Are you a kike?" I had never heard the word before and didn't know some people used it in a derogatory way to refer to Jews. After school, the same 2 boys were waiting for me. They threw me to the ground and kicked and beat me. Since that summer in 1943, I have been examining the 2 questions I mentioned. What empowers us, for example, to stay connected to our compassionate nature even under the worst circumstances? I am thinking of people like Etty Hillesum, who remained compassionate even while subjected to the grotesque conditions of a German concentration camp. As she wrote in her journal at the time, "I am not easily frightened. Not because I am brave, but because I know that I am dealing with human beings and that I must try as hard as I can to understand everything that anyone ever does." And that was the real import of this morning. Not that a disgruntled young Gestapo officer yelled at me, but that I felt no indignation, rather a real compassion, and would have liked to ask, "Did you have a very unhappy childhood? Has your girlfriend let you down?" Yes, he looked harassed and driven, sullen and weak. I should have liked to start treating him there and then, for I know that pitiful young men like that are dangerous as soon as they are let loose on mankind. Now, I'm just going to end the reading there. Now, I have spoken about this, I know, in a previous episode. Forgive me, I can't remember which one, but it's well worth returning to because it is an ongoing question. How is it that the practice of NVC can be so difficult? And here Marshall is talking about someone who is in a very trying circumstance, Etty Hillesum. And when she says, "I'm not easily frightened, not because I'm brave, but because I know that I'm dealing with human beings and that I must try as hard as I can to understand everything that anyone ever does." We could say that this is the practice of NVC, trying as hard as we can to understand what people are doing. How do we do that? We focus on the need. What need is driving this person? What need is driving me in this particular moment? And to be able to understand that is where the connection starts to happen. And it's where our insistence to have something can begin to loosen its grip on us. Really, it's our insistence on having our way that gets in the way of the practice. And this is so hard. I've been doing this for over 20 years now. And this is very challenging to do. And yet, it's a practice that the more we do it, the more likely we are to be able to connect with ourselves and with others as we become more understanding of what drives people. Human beings are not all that different from each other. At the core, we all have a need to know that we matter. We have a need to be seen and heard and understood. But it's important to not confuse that with having our way. We don't have a need to have our way. And when we start leaning in that direction, believing that it is our absolute right to have it, then we are coming from demand energy. There are no requests. It's simply a demand and insistence. I must have that. Now, if it's true that you must have it, then perhaps we are talking about a need. And in those circumstances, you would stand up for that, and you would probably not continue to engage. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and our needs can be satisfied by other people. But first of all, we take responsibility for our needs and our feelings, and we recognize that it's not what other people are doing that are driving us crazy. It's that we place a high value, and maybe properly so. You place a high value on something. Let's say, for instance, trust. It's very important to have a relationship that is founded on trust, because if you don't have that, then it's almost impossible to have a relaxed relationship. It's impossible to thrive in the relationship. Essentially, we need to be able to trust that certain things will occur. We need to be able to trust our partners when they say they're going to do something, that they'll do it, or that when they tell us they love us, they mean it, that it's not a fabrication. And this would be true also in work relationships. We need to be able to rely on what other people say and do. It doesn't mean that people don't occasionally mess up or disappoint us or let us down. We're human, and that's what human beings do. But for the most part, we would want to have faith that the need for trust would be met in most of our important relationships. And so I want to return to the question, what makes this so challenging? And I'm going to speculate that it's hard for people to develop a more relational and inclusive lens on life when they're born into a culture that doesn't have meaningful rites of passage to mark the end of a self-centered orientation. And the one I'm thinking about right now is the rite of passage of initiation, when a child or an adolescent becomes an adult. Because at that point, the person's attention shifts from a childhood orientation to an adult orientation, which is to be in service to the community. And why is this rite of passage so important? Because it's in the realm of childhood to want certain things, and even unreasonable things, to want them now. And by the way, I'm speaking of modern culture right now, because I can't say that this is how it is in all parts of the world. In fact, I know that child rearing and childhood expectations vary depending on where people are born. But in our corner of the world, it's pretty fair to say that when kids want things, they're kind of insistent on it. And they can make it very difficult for caregivers and other adults to not give in to their demands. And so when our childhood won't let go of us, it carries on into our adult relationships that are burdened by this childhood insistence. Not having the rite of passage, you could say that there are aspects of us that continue to live on that are troublesome in our relationships. And so this is typically what gets in the way of people being able to clearly recognize that there's a significant difference between a need and a want, especially a strong want or desire. When we begin to believe that if we don't have this particular desire met, that we won't be able to function. So what does it mean then to grow up? I would say to grow up is to recognize that we don't have our needs met all of the time, but maybe we can have enough of our needs met enough of the time. And here I'm speaking about basic needs, but also our relationships can be good enough. We can have enough trust that people will follow through. We can have enough trust that people actually love us, even though they won't consistently behave in the ways that we would like. There's a lot of discernment required here, the ability to step back and just wonder, what do I actually really need? Maybe this is good enough right now. How can I proceed without getting what I would prefer or what I strongly desire, and recognize that in fact, I am having my needs met at a basic level, and this is pretty darn good. If you can get to that place and recognize that difference between having what you want and having what you need for a good enough life. And in our part of the world, when people are being told, you can have more, you can get more, you can dream more, I understand the seductive quality of that. I've been under its spell myself. And yet, it's not where I wish to place my energy, because there's something to be said for simply enjoying a good enough life. So the short answer then, why is it so difficult to put NVC into practice? I would say it's because we so often confuse our needs with our wants / desires / expectations. So get clear on what those differences are, what those distinctions are. And consider this, that when Marshall refers to Eddie Hillesum, who dies in a concentration camp, he is holding her up as an example of someone who knows how to stay connected to her own humanity, who knows how to have compassion for someone even as things don't work out for her. And so if you can make that your practice, what does it mean to have your needs met and to take responsibility for your needs and live a good enough life, to have good enough relationships, to have good enough friendships? I leave you with that, dear listener. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.